Hey everybody, Objectively Dan here, and you may have heard us talk about a term called religious trauma on this show before, but what exactly is that? Well, according to Dr. Laura Anderson, it is the physical, emotional, or psychological response to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that overwhelm an individual's ability to cope and return to a sense of safety. And something else from therapist.com that says some signs of religious trauma may include self-hatred, shame, perfectionism, hypervigilance, difficulty with making decisions, loss of community, lack of boundaries, sexual dysfunction, and mental health disorders. And today, I want to talk about this a little bit more. So I have the founder of Recovering from Religion, Dr. Darrel Ray, ready to field your questions about religious trauma and more. So please give us a call because the show is starting right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host, Objectively Dan. This is the live call-in show that happens every single week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time. We talk to people about what they believe and why, and if you'd like to call us, you sure can do that. We've got open lines right now. The number for that is 512-991-9242, or you can call through your computer at tiny.cc/calltw. And as always, Truth Wanted is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. And every single week, I always have a special guest. This week is no different. It is, as I mentioned before, the wonderful Dr. Darrel Ray. Dr. Darrel Ray, welcome back to Truth Wanted. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dan. Glad to be back. It's been a while since I've seen you or Kelly or any of the gang.
It's been a minute. We got Kelly on deck with us right now, and he is our backup host today, so thanks for that, Kelly. If one of us drops out, be sure to know that Kelly will help us out. So yeah, it's been a minute, Dr. Darrel Ray, and you have been telling me a little bit about what's been going on with Recovering from Religion. For those of you who don't know, Recovering from Religion is an organization that the Atheist Community of Austin has proudly been partnering with on several occasions over the years. And it's a great organization that, well, actually, you know what am I talking about? Dr. Darrel Ray, what is Recovering from Religion? You should probably tell it better than I should, right? So,
well, I'm always happy to let other people do our advertising for us, free advertising. Yeah. And excuse me, we probably get more referrals from the ACA than any other single source. We really appreciate that. And we have been able to help thousands of people because you guys told them about us. So, yeah, anyway, that's the way it is. Yeah, we're incorporated in the United States. We're global. We've got, as I was saying earlier, almost 500 volunteers in every time zone on the planet. And I don't know how many countries, 30, 40 countries. We've got all sorts of volunteers, and literally from Moscow to Russia, not Moscow, Idaho. And
okay. I'm glad you clarified about that.
Clear around to Perth, Australia. And we even have some really interesting volunteers that are themselves under great pressure from their own religious environment, Muslims who volunteer for us from Muslim countries. Now, that's pretty crazy to think somebody who could get their head chopped off volunteer for us. Anyway, yeah.
Well, yeah. So in case you haven't gotten to it yet, Recovering from Religion does offer peer support from volunteers all around the world. They do voice chats and text chats for that.
Right.
Like you said, I'm always happy to talk about the org because I think it's a wonderful thing. One of the things that we talk about a lot on here, as we talked about before, is this idea of religious trauma, right? I mean, like, I think part of the reason why many of us do what we do is because we've been hurt, right? Mm-hmm. We've been hurt by these institutions that are religiously organized, right? And it seems like there's unique issues that come with that are different from other kinds of traumatic experiences, right? And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because I think you, of all people, have a lot of thoughts. There's a reason why you're called Dr. Darrel Ray. It's not just like a YouTube thing, like you are a doctor. So, I do want to hear that.
I'm a YouTube doctor.
That's right.
No, I've been a psychologist my entire adult life, pretty much. I was looking back after our conversation. I'm 40 46 years ago. I got my doctorate. So I've had it for a while. Anyway, that's irrelevant. I'm a psychologist, and I have practiced for years, and I've seen lots of things in my interaction with people that I couldn't quite understand until in 2009, Dr. Marlene Winnell came up with the idea of religious trauma. And the minute she told me of that, I was at a conference, she mentioned it to me, and I thought, damn, that explains so much. So many people seem to have what looks like PTSD, some kind of trauma, and yet they'd never been in a war, they'd never been in a plane crash, they'd never had any major trauma that you would normally attribute trauma to, and yet they were showing the signs. And then when I started scratching below the surface, I found out, well, it's because of the way they were raised in a high control religious environment, for example, where the children were spanked for not learning their Bible lessons at 5 years old. That can lead to big time trauma later. As we now know, childhood adverse experiences can lead to adult trauma. And adverse childhood experiences that are religiously based, we could call it adverse religious experiences, can lead to adult trauma. And one of those traumas, we see a lot of it recovering from religion, is fear of hell and fear of afterlife, fear of Armageddon. A lot of religions have some kind of an afterlife fear thing, and or being, that kind of thing. That's a potential symptom. If I can't, I've been out of the church for 10 years and I still wake up with night terrors about fear of hell. It's probably a symptom of trauma there. So
yeah, that's interesting that you talk about it as this kind of like newer description, like a newer thing, because it's like same thing with like PTSD, right? Like, people weren't talking about PTSD like during World War II, right? That was the thing. It was shell shock syndrome, right? Like that was the thing that came later. And it's like, well, yeah, of course people are gonna. To me, it seems common sense, but it's like, until we have a clinical sort of until we have actual research, right? Until it's been explored in an academic setting, we almost don't even have the concepts or words to think about it. So it's interesting to hear you talk about, this is something that I learned in 2009, because it's like, obviously people have been experiencing this form of trauma for millennia, right? Like ever since religion's been a thing, but it seems like only recently, at least, and I've seen this too, we talked a little bit about this before the show, that there's more people kind of recognizing the unique stuff that comes with religious trauma. And in particular, there's a larger sort of Christian deconstruction movement that's happening right now that I think are really talking about it. And part of the people that we're talking about that is part of the way how I came to, doing my activism here, I think. So there's definitely, a huge sort of growth in the public awareness of it, I'd say. Yeah.
There's been a huge growth of it. And one of the problems is, as Christians are wont to do, is they always steal and try to use science or other ideas for their own benefit. And so we are seeing a wide range of research. And for example, probably a month, maybe even a week doesn't go by that somebody doesn't contact me and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing my doctoral dissertation around religious trauma or something related to that. I wasn't getting that 5 years ago, and now it's happening very regularly. So there's a lot of research going on. However, and this is the kicker, I'm getting calls or emails from people who are doing PhDs at religious universities, and they're studying religious trauma for example, from Liberty University or Regents University or Oral Roberts University. Those are places where Brigham Young University, you got to sign a thing that says, I will not masturbate while I'm, going to school here. I will not have sex outside of marriage. I won't use pornography. Right.
We want to study the thing that we helped create.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Interesting.
And so we've got religious people claiming that they know how to treat religious trauma. And we've got PhD psychologists coming out of Brigham Young University or Oral Roberts, high degrees, people with higher degrees claiming they can treat religious trauma. But the real claim is you were traumatized by their religion, not by my religion. And ultimately, if you come to my religion, we can help you get over your religious trauma. They don't want to admit that virtually every religion, and I say virtually, I'm not going to say all, but virtually every religion has the potential to create real trauma in its adherents. And I'm not just talking cults. I'm not just talking Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. Every single religion.
That's a bold claim, Dr. Del Rey. Because like I'll give you this for example. Like I do see a therapist sometimes. I don't see it super regularly, but I do have a contact for that. And she understands. Obviously, I talked to her about the stuff I do here, and she's a self-described Christian. She's a very liberal Christian, but she's a Christian, and she's not afraid to tell me that. And really, I don't really care too much. I guess it's not really, doesn't really come up because why should it, right? If she's giving me the kind of therapy, but you're explicitly saying you think religious people don't have a place or shouldn't have a place in religious trauma and the therapy of that.
Well, let me give you an example. As you well know, we run the Secular Therapy Project, and I started that one back in 2012. There was a fellow, and we vet everybody that comes into us. Your therapist might be great, and I have no objections to that person, that kind of a practice, but they would never qualify for what we're doing, because if you've got religious trauma or trauma that's related to your religion in some way, you don't want to get in there after 3 sessions, find out your psychologist or social worker or clinician that you're working with thinks that religion is okay and good and doesn't cause trauma. You don't want that. So here's the example. It's very timely for what we're going through right now in our nation. A fellow with a PhD from Notre Dame University applied to be a secular therapist about 6 or 7 years ago. I saw the application. I wrote him back. I said, can you keep your religion out of, Notre Dame, pretty damn good PhD, right?
Sure.
And he'd been in practice for like 15 years. So he wasn't just fresh out of the school. And I asked him, could you keep your religion out of your practice? He said, sure, I can. I'm well trained. So, okay, I have one question for you. You have a 22-year-old college student coming to you for help. You've been seeing her for about 3 weeks. And in the 4th session, she says she's going into the abortion clinic to get an abortion, and she wants some help staying calm as she walks through the people who are going to harass her as she goes into the clinic to get the abortion. How would you help her?
Yeah.
I sent that email, and he did not respond. I waited a week. I turned around. I sent him the same email again. Hey, I haven't heard back from you. How could you help her? Silence. 3 weeks went by. He finally responded, and all he said was, I could not help her.
Wow. Yeah. You're pointing at something that's, I think, a criticism I often bring up, particularly of liberal Christianity, which is just this idea of like, well, the reason why liberal Christianity exists is because secularism exists, right? Because it's like the values that we would call maybe good from Christianity can absolutely be adopted and followed through by secular people. There's no way that just because you're religious that somehow puts up a barrier from you being able to do or hold the same values as a religious person might, if you frame it that way, right? But the deeply held convictions, right? If you like you mentioned, if you truly believe that abortion is murder, right? Like, how can you help somebody that wants to have an abortion or saying, hey, I had this experience? Because like that's going to be in conflict on some level. Yeah, for sure. I see what you're saying there.
And I don't know about your therapist, but as long as you don't hit one of those trigger points for her, she's probably going to be a good therapist. But you don't know what trigger points the therapist has. And all we want to do in Secular Therapy Projects is eliminate one of the bigger ones, and that's superstitious beliefs that people can walk on water, or they can talk to a god and the god answers them. That's kind of weird to think that you could get your depression healed by praying. And there are counselors that tell people, have you prayed about this? Or do you want to read the Bible? There are lots of counselors out there that bring their religion into their practice. And I'm I'm not saying yours does that. I'm just saying we've seen it far too often. So we just don't let anybody into Secular Therapy Project that doesn't prove to us that they're secular. Period.
No, I hear your point. Because I think it's about the convictions that you hold specifically, right? Like sexual convictions, for example. Like if you truly believe that having a sexual relationship outside of marriage is not only unholy, right, or against God, like that's going to frame your point of reference. Like you might still think, maybe it's not unholy, or maybe it's not a sin in the way that other people think it's a sin, but maybe there's these negative consequences that still come from this kind of thing. Like I hear this kind of thing all the time from folks who still want to try to justify these what they would call sins, right? Through a secular lens. Like there's still a kind of a justification there. So I can see your point in how that can get in the way.
There's other things that you wouldn't think about. What if you were polyamorous and you went to a counselor who still had notions about monogamy is the only way to have relationships?
Right.
How are they going to help you? They can't. They're stuck in that paradigm. Even atheists, I know atheist therapists who absolutely won't work with polyamorous people because they don't believe in that stuff.
Because there's prejudice there that that'll bias.
Even more so among religious counselors who still hold with those religious ideas and beliefs.
Yeah, that you bring up a great point. And folks, we do have open lines right now. So if you think Dr. Darrel Ray is full of shit, I'm fully confident that Dr. Darrel Ray will defend himself and will back it up. He'll walk the walk. He doesn't just talk the talk. Okay, so please do call us in. Or hey, if you have something that you want to ask an expert on, or you have just questions about whatever, the general stuff we talk about on here, feel free to call in. We're always happy to do that. I am loving this conversation, and I do want to actually keep talking about this topic, but I am going to pivot real quick because we should talk about our comments, right? Because every single week we are asking you folks at home our segment that we want the truth segment. We're asking you guys a prompt or question from that. Last week we asked you, what is it that makes aliens want to leave the Earth immediately? And here are some of our favorite answers from that. Number 3 comes from Jason Techlord, who says, why did aliens want to leave the Earth immediately? Humans stated liking the probing. So, I mean, that could go either way. They could either want to get out of there or they want to come even more. So I don't know. I don't know about that one, but pretty funny, Jason Techlord. Thanks for that. Number 2 comes from Loki, who said aliens will leave Earth immediately because there aren't enough charging stations that actually work. And that is so funny and so true. We probably wouldn't have the right adapters or whatever. I don't think it would work for what they're doing. It's already hard enough. It's already hard enough traveling internationally, let alone through space, right? So that's a good point. I like that one. But our number 1 answer comes from Jen Fay H, who says, why do aliens leave immediately? They made the mistake of opening Twitter. And it's true. Absolutely. My goodness, I don't go on Twitter anymore, and I have been happier ever since. I don't know about you. You still go on Twitter?
I got off Twitter right after Elon Musk went nuts, and then I haven't looked back. Yep.
Every time I log in, it is a bad experience. I end up upset or just bothered by something I'm seeing, right? It's like there's no way that's healthy for you if you keep doing that. I don't know.
And we've gotten off of Twitter and recovered from religion. We're not even on there anymore.
Really?
Or minimally.
Really?
Well, it wasn't it wasn't doing what we wanted. Why would we want to waste our time and resources there?
Yeah. I could totally see that. Well, thanks so much for your answers this week, guys. Those were hilarious. We, of course, have another prompt this week. And the prompt for this week is, what trivial conspiracy theory do you think has merit? And, we were scratching our heads at this one before the show. And I was trying to think of one that would be more broadly applied. Because, every time I kind of think of this, it's like, it's not a conspiracy. Like it's just kind of legit, right? Like, oh, they take away selling chargers with your phones because they want you to pay more money. Like, no, that's just capitalism. I think that's just true, right? Like they may never say that, but like, I don't know. I don't know how much of a conspiracy that is. So I don't know. Were you able to think of one for this?
No, but that reminds me that I think it's a conspiracy by Apple to keep us on their particular charging system. So, with their particular cords. I think that's a valid. I mean, that's a proven.
Well, that's
conspiracy.
why the EU's changing that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, they are.
I think that's totally true. But hey, we couldn't come up with great answers for this one, but I bet you guys can. So leave a comment below and we'll read our best 3 answers next week. Cause I know there's some good ones out there. I don't know. I don't want to get into it. I was like, there's some I could think of, but it's too obscure. It's too not in this realm, in this space. But going back to our conversation here, Dr. Darrel, I do want to talk a little bit more about recovering from religion, because in the past we've emphasized that, hey, it's a resource you can go to talk to people for peer support, and that's absolutely true. But one thing I don't think I've really talked a whole lot about, and I do want to talk about, is it's not just for like talking to people. If you go to Recovering from Religion, they have a ton, and I mean a ton, of web content, like text content that you can read about all kinds of subjects. In fact, I got the page up here right now. I see you've got like, your typical stuff, like talking about trauma, for example, and cancer support I see is on here. We've got abortion, how to help with that. We have different belief systems as well. So we've got atheism, but we also have Calvinism. We got Church of Christ. We got Jehovah's Witnesses. So you've got a lot of tailor-made content for different folks as well, which I think is like really cool, because I don't know. I wish I had read some of that stuff when I was deconstructing, because I know reading and hearing other people's experiences, particularly on like YouTube, was super helpful to me. And I imagine there's a lot of great written work on there as well. Yeah,
and there's tons of YouTube references as well. But what happens is people call into us and say, I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and I think I'm the only one. I've never known anybody that left the church. Do you know anybody, or can you tell me anything? And so we created a whole team of people who do nothing but vet resources. And as requests and things come in, we say, okay, now we've got a whole channel, if you will, within our resources dedicated just to the trials and tribulations of leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, because they are different. Leaving Scientology is different than leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. Leaving the Mormon Church is different than leaving the Catholic Church. And while there's lots of similarities, people have their own unique experience, and they want to talk to other people who share that. Not really unique experience. I mean, if you think about it, everybody thinks I'm the only one that this ever happened to. And what we can say is you're not alone. In fact, that is our motto. You are not alone. We're here to walk with you, and we're here to help connect you with other people who've probably gone through very similar things.
Yeah.
There isn't a religion on the planet that we haven't heard from. It's that simple.
Okay. I'm gonna challenge you on that, because now I'm gonna find some obscure 12th century religion and like see if anybody's called in about it. But no, it's like I totally hear you, because on our side of the fence, it's kind of like, there's kind of these very big similarities that we can kind of make ties to and make connections with. But when you're going through that, you really do feel like, I don't know if anybody's done this before, right? Like, I don't know if people are really experiencing this kind of thing. Say what you will about the internet. It's done a lot of terrible things, but if there's one good thing it has done, it is connected to other people so that they can see, hey, there are other people that have gone through this and have thought through the stuff, like this complex theological question has a whole article written by somebody who's thought about this, right? Like, those specifics that, that sometimes we tend to just kind of wave away because you and I aren't thinking about it or worried about it every day, is going to be a big worry for somebody who grows up in a particular system where questions like that are going to be really important. So, I appreciate that you kind of tailor that individual experience. I think that's one barrier that we have in activism in general is that we are not just talking to one group of people. We are talking to everyone that's ever believed in something, right? Which is
right.
How do you make a message that's going to be tailored to everybody? You can't. I don't think you can.
We even have New Age resources.
Sure.
I mean, you name it, we've got it. There's so many emotional consequences. One of the key ones that we hear a lot about is sexuality. And think about it. Mormon sexuality is different than Baptist sexuality. Baptist sexuality is definitely different than Muslim sexuality or Hindu sexuality. Each one of these religions impose a certain set of sexual rules and norms and taboos that have unique impacts on our emotional and psychological development from early childhood. So you can't just apply the same treatment or same approaches to people around sexuality. And that's just one area. There's lots of other potential areas. But the Catholic Church is really big into guilt and guiltifying people all the time. But Mormons are more into shame. So you need to kind of tailor the treatment based upon where the person came from. And a good therapist is going to hear and listen and say, oh, you came from Mormonism. And that should help them understand a little bit about what treatment might be needed if you're coming to them with what looks like religious trauma. Because trauma can come from many different sources within a religion. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny because there are often critics who be like, oh, why do you make your sexuality your identity? Why do you tend to talk about this stuff all the time? And it's like, well, I identify as a straight person. I didn't really have the kinds of experiences that folks in the LGBT community have, but growing up in the church, sex was talked about all the time. Like it's like go in the Bible, it talks about sex quite a bit. Like it's definitely there and it's definitely a thing. And those kinds of values that are instilled in you, particularly in a young age, do kind of mess you up. Even as a straight guy, I think it messed me up. I definitely had, and I've been open about this before, but I had issues like enjoying sex because I had this idea that I was doing something wrong because I wasn't married, the first time I did it. And it's like, that bothered me. And it bothered people that I knew. And now I don't even care. But like, that was a big deal. And that didn't just come out of nowhere, right? It wasn't just out of a vacuum. It was because of my environment and because of my upbringing. And quite frankly, mine was much more mild compared to some of the stories that I hear just doing this show. And I know that you hear all the time with your organization.
Yeah. There's hundreds, thousands that we get, of course. But we're not here to treat people. That would be the job of the secular therapists that we work with. But our volunteers are really well trained to do peer support and to listen, and then to do, as you mentioned, send people onto the resources that'll be helpful for their particular situation. For example, we had a Muslim woman chat in recently, and we've trained our volunteers be very careful with people chatting in from a primarily Muslim country or from a Muslim family, because there can be life-threatening consequences there.
Right.
So when we interact with them, we try to be very cautious, very careful, very supportive, and assure them that what they tell us is confidential. And we offer them some of our services, but they may not be able to take advantage of our services if they're sitting in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
But we do require every Muslim majority country, if somebody chats in or calls in, they have to be using a VPN. We will not. Really? We will not even talk to somebody if they call from Saudi Arabia.
Really?
And don't have a VPN. Yep.
That's so interesting. There's some people that hear that, and I think this is just a reflection of the political climate. And, when I grew up, I grew up in Central Texas. I knew people who had very unfavorable opinions about the Muslims, particularly Muslims that I knew, and were racist, right? Quite racist. But like, when I hear about those other folks' experiences, in my context is always hearing it from an American perspective, where Muslims are the minority here and stuff. And so like when we talk about Muslims in the United States, it's very different from when you actually grew up in a Muslim majority country where some of the, more heinous ideas that come from Islam, right, actually get to manifest in a larger space, right? And to me, that's frightening. To me, it's very frustrating that there are some folks where, I don't know, you kind of talk about this and they don't really understand because we're talking about it from an American perspective, but this show wouldn't exist in I don't know, like Qatar or somewhere, right? Like it's not going to be a thing.
Well, the interesting thing North Americans, this includes Canada, don't realize is those kinds of dangers exist right here.
Yeah.
An example, again, a woman chatted in to us about a week ago from right here in the United States. Her family she's 19 years old, still living at home. Her parents are super religious and will not let her leave the house, will not support her in her education or anything unless she adheres to their wishes around getting married to a Muslim man. And they've even started selecting the man that she will be forced to get married to. We had another case where the woman was fortunately, she found out a week ahead of time, she was going to be forced to get on a plane and go to Yemen. This is about 8 years ago, and marry a man in Yemen and come back with him so he could get U.S. citizenship here. And that is happening. That is happening right now. There are Muslim communities imposing that kind of restrictions on women in the United States. So it's not just Saudi Arabia. And there are women who have been killed in the United States because they refused to marry the man their parents told them to marry.
Yeah,
it's dangerous. Islam is a pretty dangerous religion with respect to those sexuality, anything around sexuality.
Yeah. It's always about sexuality with these religions, huh? It seems like it's very few religions that don't talk about sexuality, whether it's positive or negative. They always have an opinion on it, right?
Religions learned this years ago, especially all the patriarchal religions. And I'll quote Richard Nixon. I rarely quote Richard.
Oh, we might be getting a little bit of audio issues. Dr. Ray can't hear you right now, but maybe you unplugged your mic or something. But we'll get that fixed up, I think, in just a second. While he's looking into that, I want to pivot briefly because I think we should get some callers on the line. So I think we're going to go ahead and do that. But before we do that, I have to thank the wonderful patrons that help support this show every single week. As you guys know, I'm a volunteer with the Atheist Community of Austin, and most of the people that work on this show are volunteers as well. So when you donate, you're donating to the Atheist Community of Austin, and you're saying, hey, Truth Wanted is a show that is worth supporting. So thank you guys so much for doing that. And this week's Patron of the Week is going to be, drum roll please, Jonathan Hull. Thank you so much, Jonathan Hull, and thank you to everybody that donates on the Patreon. You guys rock. And I think we got you now, Doctor. There we go.
Okay, got it. I'm sorry.
We are back.
I talked with my hands, and my hands hit the cord and unplugged my mic.
I was so confident that that's what happened, and I was like, he'll figure it out.
Yeah,
that's so funny.
Okay. Yeah, so I was saying that Richard Nixon said, if you've got them by the balls, their hearts and minds will follow. And that is what religion does. It grabs you by your genitals at a very young age and then forces you. In fact, I even have a whole book I wrote on sex, how religion distorts sexuality. Yeah. Because that's what religion does to us. It distorts us so that we can't enjoy our own bodies or the bodies of other people.
Yeah. It definitely, there's a lot of things you could say about Christianity. I don't think anybody would say it's sex positive. No. I don't even think the liberal Christians will agree with you on that. But yeah, definitely great that we can talk about it here on this space. And again, if you guys have something that you want to ask Dr. Darrel Ray or anything else that comes up with Truth Wanted, we do have some open lines still, but we are going to go ahead and get to some callers now. So let's just jump right in. We've got Mr. Krabs calling in from Maryland. Mr. Krabs, you are once again live on Truth Wanted. What's happening?
Hey, Objectively Dan. Hey, Dr. Darrel Ray. So I wanted to talk a little bit on something you said, Dr. Ray, about therapist trigger points. And I actually discovered one of my therapist trigger points I had back when I was 18 years old and having some issues. And he discovered it actually while we were doing therapy. And it wasn't me. I wasn't the trigger point, but so he was working in his garage at one point and had a little bit of an accident where he severed his thumb to the point where it had to actually be amputated to a certain extent. And I mean, that can be a very traumatic experience in itself. And like up to that point, I felt like our therapy sessions were going good. I was kind of getting some help, and I was like, okay, you know. But when we came back after his thumb had been amputated, I definitely noticed like a shift in his attitude, particularly in the way that he tried to disarm me. Because therapists all have their kind of thing, you know, whether it's a puppet, whether it's, you know, his thing was pretzel sticks. That during the session, you know, you'd have a pretzel stick, you can chew on it, you can hold it, you can do whatever the hell you want with it. It's just kind of his way of kind of disarming us. And he kept all these pretzels in this jar, as one would do, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that since part of his thumb was now missing, it was very difficult for him to open this stupid jar of his.
Yeah, that would be true. Yeah.
Like he's holding on, he's shifting his hands position and like doing everything he could to get this jar open. And just the look in his face and how dejected he was, it got to the point where I'm like, my dude, do you need to talk about this?
Well, it was fairly new to him. If I understand, this accident happened within weeks of you seeing him, right?
Basically, yeah, because he had canceled a session on me, which is fine. You know, therapists can cancel sessions, we can reschedule and all that. I had no problems with that. And it was the next session when he came back, he's like, yeah, no, this happened. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Sorry that happened. And I try to be as sympathetic as an 18-year-old could potentially be. Which is to say, probably, but let's talk about me, please.
Well, that's what you're there for, so that's not a problem.
Right.
Well, you're right. You probably did trigger something that he still hadn't had time to process. I mean, you don't get over that kind of a thing in a few weeks. But that leads me to say something more relevant, or not relevant, more broadly, and that is that every therapist has got some kind of a soft spot or a trigger spot. We all do. And no therapist is perfect. But if you're a good therapist and you've been doing it a while, you've learned which those are, where they are, and how to make sure you don't fall into the trap. And it sounds to me like the therapist he fell into the trap, but it would be very, easily to understand why he would do that. He himself was still getting used to the idea that he's partially damaged thumb. So anyway, that's an interesting observation on your part. Good observation on your part.
Yeah, so I'm just like, and his attitude towards me also changed along with it. I said, up to that point, I felt like we were making progress. I was starting to feel better about myself. But then when that happened, it just felt like now he was blaming me for all of my issues. And I'm like, I mean, okay, you could tell me I'm an asshole all you want, but I'm here to try to figure out how not to be as much. So just saying, oh, well, you did this, you did that, like that wasn't as helpful for me. And after a couple of more sessions, we eventually parted ways, and I've been essentially raw dogging my emotions since then. Now at 42 years old, because I'm a good American, which means I'm too busy and too broke to afford therapy.
I see. Well, number one, I'm sorry you had that experience. Unfortunately, he had that experience as well. The fact is, even the best of therapists, if something traumatic has happened, that would be traumatic, they're dealing with it just like you would deal with if it happened to you. So they're probably not going to be on their best game. They're probably going to respond when people are under a high level of stress. They oftentimes revert back to earlier behaviors or less sophisticated, less thoughtful behaviors. And it kind of sounds like that was what he did with you, because he was functioning at a high level before it happened. You felt like he was doing what you needed, but after that, his level dropped down. It's most of us as human beings always, if you've been in a relationship, you've probably seen your partner when they're under a lot of stress, or when you're under a lot of stress, your behavior becomes more infantile. You become more needy, Frank, or you may become more angry or more easily upset. Well, that's normal, natural. But if you're a good therapist, you learn how to roll with those punches and move forward. I'm not saying that person wasn't a good therapist. I'm just saying you hit him at a wrong time. It was a tough time for that person, just like it would be for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because oh, go ahead, Mr. Krabs.
Oh, no. You please go ahead.
I was just thinking about my own experience with therapy there as you were telling your story. And I think I have such a different perspective than I used to. Like, growing up, first of all, when I heard about people going to therapy, I thought, oh, they must be severely mentally ill. Only severely mentally ill people go to therapy, right? Because they have some sort of deep-rooted set problem. I don't have that perspective anymore. I think most people should go to therapy if they haven't, or at least even if they're completely healthy. I think it's still good to talk to somebody because I just think it's a good thing. I think we have to keep that stuff in check, and not everybody has the perspective or can be as objective as a therapist can be when dealing with your own problems, right? When we deal with our own problems, we're kind of in our own head about stuff, and talking about it with somebody else, they can give us a different perspective. So it's interesting that you say, oh, now I'm just kind of raw dogging my emotions here, because it's like, yeah, I think most people do that. And I think there is kind of a problem of access, but also a problem of wanting a willingness, I guess, to address some of that stuff too. So yeah, I don't know, just reflecting on that made me think.
And definitely stigma as well. Because there are plenty of people who are just like you said, you thought that, people who needed help, they're just that they just need help and they can't do it on their own. And that's not true at all. I'm a child of divorce, although it happened when I was like 2 years old. So it was pretty much the only life that I knew. And so I would constantly be talking to social workers in school. And I was like, oh, just so you know, it's not your fault and it's not this or that. And it's like, oh, well, I know it wasn't my fault. I was too damn years old. How could that be my fault? And as far as them being apart, I get 2 Christmases, I get 2 birthdays, I get 2 Thanksgivings, I get 2 Easters. I'm not the one suffering here. All you guys are suffering by only having one of all that crap. Come on, I'm winning here. But when I was in high school, the last few years of doing high school, again, lots of changes happening, lots of just, not knowing what all the adult experiments are going to be and all that. I had a great, amazing social worker that I was talking with. And obviously once you're out of high school, you lose that connection. And so that's why when I left high school and I'm like, no, I still need to talk with somebody. That's why I got with that therapist, because I'm like, no, I still do need this help. I recognize that in myself, and it was good for, you know, several months until the incident.
Right. Well, good on you for recognizing when you needed the help and you went out and got it. You did what you needed to do. I'd like to try to look at this from a slightly different angle, and that is, if your life is if you're impeded in some way, and I have no idea because I don't know you, Mr. Krebs, but I do know if your life is impeded in some way, you can't seem to get over something, or you're constantly hitting the same problem over and over again in your life, that's a good sign. You should go talk to somebody. And there's a cost, and I encourage people to be good old capitalist about it, right? Go out there and do a cost benefit analysis. How long do you want to keep having this problem? For example, you know, you keep losing your job. For example, you had 3 jobs in 2 years. And of course, you blame the boss or you blame the company. But sooner or later, you got to ask, what's the common denominator in these 3 losses of jobs? Well, it's all me, not the companies that I signed up for. So what's that costing me? How many thousands of dollars did I get back on my mortgage? Did I lose my health care? There's consequences sometimes. And when you look at it, I can't afford it. I can't afford to get the help I need. Then what you're saying is I'm willing to accept the cost of not fixing the problem. You know, I'm going to go ahead and drive my car on three wheels because I can't afford a 4th wheel right now. That's kind of the way I look at it. And I would like people who need.
I have had that as well.
Okay.
And not so much having 3 jobs in you know, X number of years, but I stuck with this one job for 8 years where I was in an incredibly toxic situation, and my attitude kept on getting worse and worse and worse as I was getting passed up for promotions, passed up for raises. To give you an idea of how bad I was, I went for 5 years with a 0% raise, which at that point is essentially a pay cut.
You were taking pay cuts, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I kind of was deep into kind of the culture there where they had really great medical with a big old asterisk behind that benefits. And I thought, okay, well, there's no way I could get any better. And because of my attitude kept on getting worse and worse and worse because of the just people constantly bullying me at that place. I eventually got myself fired for something incredibly stupid. And honestly, that was the best thing for me. The absolute best thing for me, because it allowed me to reevaluate where I was, what I was doing, and allowed me to get back to school and put me on a career path that I wanted to be from the very beginning. And while I do still feel like I'm 10 or 20 years behind where I could be, the fact that I'm on the career path I am on just feels so much better these days.
Well, good for you. Life kicked you in the butt, and you took the message. You accepted the message. It sounds like.
Yeah.
And let me suggest, and I'm not here to diagnose you, but there's kind of the opposite example of what I threw out there of 3 jobs, and staying in a job that's toxic and not giving you a pay raise and all that. It also has a potential to push you into depression. I don't know if you were depressed or not, but
and did.
Okay. So you didn't recognize, and this is something I see in people a lot, and they don't recognize how much their own environment affects them. What I've seen, and I'll relate this to religion, of course. People have told me so many times, I was depressed when I was religious, and then when I finally got out of religion, my depression just went away, or I stopped having to take my meds, or I didn't have to take nearly as much meds. So what that tells us is your immediate environment really can impact your psychological well-being. But it's hard to see that forest, it's hard to see the trees when you're in that forest. Everything looks normal and natural, even as you're slowly but surely being sucked down into a state of suboptimal state that we would call depression, perhaps. So you didn't recognize it.
The little dog in the middle of the fire, thinking, hey, everything is fine. Everything is fine. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a little bit of fire. What's the worst that could happen?
Okay. Well, thankfully you got your butt kicked and you took the lesson and went out and did something about it, and you're a hell of a lot better now. That's great to hear.
Sounds like life is much better for you, Mr. Krabs. Anything else you want to add before we go ahead and let you go?
I don't think so. But I do, as much as I don't do therapy because of, as I said, being a good American, busy and poor. Well, not poor, but, not willing to put up the money and all that. I would do say that anybody who needs help definitely should get it. Anybody who feels like, and I don't have a professional support network, but I do feel like with the friends that I have, with the things that I've kind of set myself up with, I have enough of a support structure to at least band-aid my way through it.
Great.
Good.
That sounds awesome. And I co-sign on your message there, Mr. Krabs. If you can afford it and you're interested in trying it, what's the worst that can happen? Just try it. See if it helps you. See if it's something that can do something for you. Because I if anything, not enough people probably talk to people that can help them out the best, in a professional capacity, right? But anyway, Mr. Krabs, thanks so much for your call, and I appreciate you giving us your perspective. I thought that was really great.
Go live your best life.
Yeah, I have some more thoughts I want to ask you about. But before I do that, I do need to do this real because we're like halfway into the show. Got a few announcements I need to take care of real quick. First of all, as many of you know, we have initiated phase 2 of our brick fundraiser. We want to highlight some of these standout orders we've received. So we are doing some call outs this week. Our featured brick comes from Rosalind from Virginia. It says in honor of Dave Warnock, which is awesome. Thank you so much for your purchase, Rosalind, and you can get yours at tiny.cc/ACA bricks. By the way, I was in Nashville. Actually, Sydney Davis Jr. just got married recently. I got to go to her wedding, which was awesome. And, Dave is in the area. I did ask someone who was close to Dave how Dave's doing, and right now I hear he's doing just fine now. So those who want to hear about Dave, don't message him because he gets messages all the time. You're probably, if anything is going on, he'll let us know. And you might hear about it from here. But Dave's doing good. So thanks everybody who show your support for Dave. And his awesome stuff. And just so you're aware, we are accepting super chats as well. We may read them live on the air, so feel free to make us read things that you've written, assuming that they are YouTube appropriate, of course. And we will get to those when they come in. One other thing I want to plug is the Truth Wanted merch. We haven't talked about merch in a bit, kind of recently we have, I guess, but there's a while where we haven't. But yeah, there is a merch store. You should definitely go to it. It's tiny.cc/merch-ACA. You get all of your hoodies and mugs and t-shirts and all kinds of stuff. And if you do, you can tag me on Twitter if you get stuff. And I might respond if I decide to log in. I'm probably logging in at once a month, maybe. Now, I don't know, just to see. But anyway, you should do that regardless. Last but not least, before I move on, I need to thank the wonderful, awesome crew that helped make this show happen. As I mentioned, also mostly made up of volunteers with the Atheist Community of Austin. And there's our crew right now, repping the merch. See if you want to get some shirts. Okay, that's what they look like, kind of. I think that's one of the older ones, actually. I'm not sure if that one's in store anymore. Maybe it is. But thanks, crew, for helping us make the show happen. And thank you to, of course, everybody who watches and supports the show. You guys are amazing. Going back to the therapy thing, the therapy thing is interesting because it's a little off topic from what we usually talk about on here, but I think it's worth talking about because there is a culture now. I would say the folks who are maybe my age and younger, who are like become much more aware of like, I would say like therapy terms, right?
Yeah.
I see a lot of this kind of talk of therapy and stuff that comes up in therapy, you know, talking about mental health in general, right? But you know, that comes up places like TikTok and stuff like that. And I feel very mixed about it sometimes, Dr. Darrel, right? Because on the one hand, I'm really glad that there's kind of a more awareness of the subject in general, right? Destigmatization of mental health issues and whatnot. On the other hand, I do worry that like maybe the 18-year-old who is talking about I don't know CTPSD or something, or you know, PTSD and stuff like that, like maybe doesn't actually know what they're talking about, right? Or maybe isn't the most authoritative speaker of the subject, but they kind of pretend they do because they put some music in the background and they speak very confidently on it. Like, I don't know. What do you think about this rise in like, I don't know, the culture that's kind of surrounded sort of mental health support? Have you observed this too?
In spades, I have observed it. Yeah, and I agree with you. The 18-year-old who has their own YouTube channel on mental health is probably not the person you want to go to.
Yeah.
But let me just put it in perspective. Back in the 1890s, 1900s, Freud wrote a whole bunch of things, and that got into id, ego, all that. That became popular language in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Still is. I mean, ego, id, Oedipus complex, electric complex, those are all things that got into our language long before YouTube or podcasts. So it just happens. Psychology is interesting, fun. People like to do it. Here's the problem. And I think it is a problem. I hear young people with no education in psychology saying you're narcissistic or you're depressed or you're egotistical. You know, they're taking psychological terms and applying them. And I hear, and it's dangerous when you're in a relationship, when the wife or the husband accuses, you know, their partner of, you know, being a sex addict or a porn addict. Those are number one, they're not true diagnoses, but that's leaked into the popular psychology too. And all these pop psychology things, words really do have impact on people.
Yeah.
And if you say you are acting like a sociopath, well, wait a minute. Who are you, first of all, to diagnose it? Do you even know what a sociopath looks like or acts like? You know, that's the problem I see, and I agree with you 100%, maybe more than you thought I would agree with you. I don't know.
I hopefully I expected that your observations match up with mine. Here's the thing, because it's like I think I'm an empathetic person, right? And when I hear people talk about their issues and their struggles, like I want to believe them. I want to say that this sounds like this sucks and this sounds like this is bad. But I also know for a fact that people sometimes exaggerate things, right? So like, for example, Mr. Krabs calling in earlier about his toxic workplace. The reason why I really started going to therapy a few years ago, and I don't see it as much now, is because I was in a very bad work environment. And that affected my mental health so badly. It's crazy looking back how much better I am just like coping with life and doing things, because I'm and how much that affected me and how much that played. So like, that's a thing that happened to me, right? My toxic work environment. But what happens when folks are talking about, I don't know, like you said, calling somebody a psychopath or calling somebody a sociopath or saying these things where it's like, but like there are clinical things to that maybe we can't say. Like you can call a relationship with somebody problematic without using some of these terms, right? But at the same time, I know I was in a toxic workplace. I don't need a therapist to tell me it was, right? I think I can make that decision on my own. So it's kind of complicated, right?
It is. What you have to look at is it impeding my growth and development as a human being? And if you're in a job like we heard Mr. Krebs say, where 8 years of no pay is impeding his own goal of doing what he's now doing. Yeah. Yes, you can make your own decision. That goes without saying. Yeah. But you need to get good enough at spotting the problems, spotting the symptoms for yourself. And then go find somebody. I think one of the things I see a lot of is people in relationships accusing each other of being in a, quote, toxic relationship.
Right.
Well, you've been married for 15 years and you're now in a, quote, toxic relationship. What about the first 12 years? Were you in a toxic relationship then? Probably not. What happened, and this is a pet peeve of mine, is that relationships go sour. People get tired of each other. People don't give each other space. People grow in ways that weren't expected. There's all sorts of things that can happen. It doesn't mean it's toxic. It means the two of you no longer see eye to eye on some important components. And do you want to go to a marriage counselor and talk about that? Let's try that. But don't say you are toxic or we're toxic. That's a whole nother level of guiltifying and shaming. It's basically saying the other person is the problem. I'm not the problem. I have nothing to do with this problem.
Yeah.
I'm not saying people don't get into toxic relationships, but if you've been married for 15 years and you got 2 kids and you got along for the first 12 years, what's changed? What's going on there?
Right. Yeah. And like, it's hard too, because obviously like there are just people who do bad things to other people. And there are people who fit, these clinical pathologies, I guess. Right. And it's like, I don't want
is every unhappy person in a marriage married to a psychopath? Or
like just because you're married. Yeah, exactly. Just because your marriage isn't happy doesn't mean you're married to a psychopath. Right. Yeah,
exactly.
It's hard because again, like, it's a tricky situation. You're dealing with other people and you want to see them in the best light, but at the same time, it's a he said, she said for the most part. Right. And I'm even less qualified than you to even make determinations on this kind of thing. I'm just an average Joe. So it's like, how do you navigate that? I don't know. I guess my takeaway is just, I can only focus on myself. The concept that I argued with my therapist with when I first heard about this, but come more to begrudgingly accept is the concept of inner locus and outer locus of control. Right. Yeah. Because I'm like a hard determinist. So that's, I have like these philosophical objections. And I think she was like, Dan, you're overthinking this. Right. But the idea of being, the recognition of what's outside and what's inside your control. And the more that you can recognize that what's inside your control, generally the healthier you can be with your life and stuff, right? But and that's not to say that there are things that are outside of your control that don't contribute to things. Like my workplace was terrible. That was definitely draining on me, but at the end of the day I had to cope, right? I had to figure something out. I think what therapy has taught me the best is it's not about figuring yourself out necessarily. It's about figuring out how to live life, right? Like you can read all day about these different diagnoses and these different symptoms, and you can mix and match things all the time. But at the end of the day, you got to live your life and you got to figure out how you're going to get to the next day. And I don't know, I think that's the perspective I've gotten from getting the help I've needed.
I think that's a reasonable perspective. And I see people, as we said earlier, environments impact our mental health and our ability. And we're adapting, and we may be maladapting, maybe not adapting well to whatever the environment is. And if you're becoming depressed inside of a job, that's a maladaptation, a poor adaptation to that environment. But what if it's not the job that's toxic? What if the job itself is not the problem? What if you've outgrown the skill set that job requires? Are you going to now blame the boss, blame the job? Or are you going to say, maybe I'm ready for a different challenge in my life? So it does relate to what you mentioned, external locus of control versus internal locus of control. And if your audience has not heard those terms, go look them up.
Yeah.
About 20% of the population has an internal locus of control, and about 80% has an external locus of control. Basically, to make it real simple, when you've got an internal locus of control, you have a confidence that you've got control over the basics of your own life.
Yeah.
Whereas an external locus of control blames everybody else. It's the boss's problem. It's the teacher's problem. It's the parent's problem. You are not taking responsibility. And so many people have an external locus of control. And that means you're not going to learn from your mistakes because you're too busy blaming other people for your mistakes.
Yeah, that's a hard pill for me to swallow still, even today. Not to say that I don't want to take responsibility for my own actions, but sometimes I do think it's like somebody's just being a shitty person, right? And
right. But if everybody is a shitty person, or if 8 out of 10 people you interact with are being shitty, what's the common denominator here?
Yeah.
That's always the question to ask. And it goes back to skepticism and realism. Be a bit skeptical about your own judgment. We are the really bad judges of our own mental health and of our own environment. And we're really quick to blame everybody else for the way we feel.
Yeah.
Once you've gotten a hold of that and start being skeptical about your own ability in that area, you can start refining it and getting better. Because of the 8 people that you see are assholes, one of them really is. And you're falsely accusing the other 7.
Yeah.
Well, that's a formula for really bad life. Why do you want to be that way?
Yeah. For my own journey, I think it's just been like again, just like trying to solve challenges, not just like other people. I don't think I could change other people. It's just like figuring out what I can do with it, right? But anyway, talking a lot about this subject, we could definitely move on to some other things here. We do have open lines, folks. So if you do want to call us, we got about 25 or so more minutes to the show. And I think Dr. Darrel is going to try to join us on Discord, assuming that we can get him on the Discord server. We'll figure it out. We're going to get there. But I do see, talking about skepticism, there is kind of a movement of folks, and I'm sure you've seen this, of a kind of a new Stoic movement in some ways. Have you heard about this? It's kind of sort of adjacent to these like red pill communities of folks who are talking about defining masculinity and defining their sense of self-worth and self-control through their own actions. So there's like this other extreme to it where we've been talking about folks who do maybe externalize their problems and blame other people. And then there's other folks who say, no, everything is like within your control and there's no external forces whatsoever that should be moving you or influencing you, right? Do you know these kind of folks that I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's just they've swung way too far the other way.
Sure.
We are not in control of the universe. We only control of the universe within 6 feet of me, maybe.
Yeah. But I think it is interesting, like when you look at like how people's socioeconomic outcomes do affect their life in meaningful ways, do affect mental health, do affect like your coping skills and your education. I think about, wow, I am a very privileged person in a sense because I come up in an environment where one can freely talk about this stuff now, but also do have access to the resources I need. I do make enough now to where I can afford seeing a therapist if I need to. That's not something that other people see. And through that, it's given me coping skills. I mean, so that's when I go back to this thing of like, okay, how much is it that I can control really, if there's so many external forces that do change us so much, right? I don't know. That's what goes back and forth in my head.
I'm sure you've seen this in your own life. Many people listening to us probably have, but the older you get, the more experience you get, the more education you get, the better you gain control over your environment or the environment that you desire to control. People who don't have the means, I mean, the more experience you get, the better the job, the better, all that gives you the opportunity to gain more control over your life. And control is a funny word because control doesn't mean you're pulling all the levers, but you're able to understand the boundaries you want to set for your life. I think that's more important. Boundary setting is a big problem for many people. They don't know when to say no, or they say no too often to opportunities, So it's learning which, like I said a little bit earlier, how do I know which one of these 8 people is the asshole I need to be wary of? And how can I build relationships with the other 7 rather than just saying, he cut me off on the highway today, so I'm not going to ever speak to him again. That's something, it just drives me nuts. People who get so angry and upset over so-called being cut off on the highway. Well, that's a clear sign you think you control more than you really do control. And I'm always shocked. I've got friends that every time they come to my house, I got cut off today on the way over to your house. You know something? I've been out of my house 50 times in the last 2 months and nobody's ever cut me off. I wonder why I never get cut off, but they do. Now, I've had people do dangerous things on the highway, but I just slow down and take my time and make sure that I don't get involved in their accident. Anyway,
it's framing, right? Framing, I think, is a big part of it. Framing in perspective there. And you're right. I think that's a skill that is a hard thing to do in general, right? It's just hard. Yeah. It's hard for the average person, let alone people who face adversity.
But the folks that are paying attention to psychology, that want to use the terminology, I would encourage them to get out and learn the skills of psychology, not the language. Learn the skill of setting boundaries. Learn the skill of setting goals. Learn the skill of listening to other people and paying attention to how they treat each other and how they treat you. Look at how you treat people. Get skeptical about your own judgment, your own thinking process. Those are adult skills.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the most important thing that should be the takeaway, I think, right? Not to again delegitimize other people's experiences, but for me, the conclusion I come to is it's not about checking all the boxes and seeing if people meet certain conditions or if you meet certain conditions, because that's a thing, but it's just about figuring out life. To me, that's been my personal takeaway from it all. But hey, let's talk to some other folks.
Okay,
let's talk to some other people who want to talk to you. Actually, we have an RFR volunteer who wants to call in and talk about some of their experiences with recovering from religion. I almost said the other. You guys. I know this happens all the time because there's freedom from religion, and then there's recovering from religion. Yeah, and I feel like that happens to you guys probably once a week. You'll get emails.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Inbox, right? Yeah, for sure. We have Cass who's calling in from Colorado who wants to talk to us. Cass, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Not too much. I saw Dr. Darrel Ray on and decided I wanted to call in. And it's funny you mentioned about the confusion between freedom from religion and recovering from religion, because I'm actually a part of both. So sometimes when I talk to people, I'm like, I'm a part of RFR and FFRF. So I just throw out all the R's and all the F's everywhere.
Right. Yeah, I definitely see how that comes up a lot. So you're a volunteer with your organization yourself. Do you do peer support with your work?
Yeah, I do a fair amount with recovering from religion, but I think my favorite thing that I do is I help run support groups every month. And I actually run 3 every month. 2 are just kind of generic for anybody to come in and hang out and talk about their experience. And another one is specifically for persons with disabilities. And I really like that meeting a lot. I like them all. Every time I hold a new support group, it's my new favorite one.
Great. What's the value that comes to you from doing that?
For me, it was really something. It's really nice to be able to talk with people about their journeys. And I think earlier in the show you were saying that you find yourself as an empath, and I find myself kind of in the same category as that. So I really like bonding and connecting with people in that kind of way. And these kinds of support groups are something that I really wish that I had available or had known about as I was leaving religion, because it would have been really nice to know that, that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't the only person who was having doubts or having questions or just, was looking for different kinds of answers. So for me, it's really nice to be able to provide that kind of support to people. And it's so amazing of how simple just listening to somebody and acknowledging that their feelings and that them as a person is valid and heard. It's amazing how much that means to people when you do something so simple like that.
Cass is way underselling themselves, period. Cass does an enormous amount of in leading our social media. We're all over the place, and it's largely due to what Cass and his team, because Cass has put together an amazing social media team for Recovery from Religion. So anyway, I just want to let everybody know we're not hearing it all from Cass. He's doing a lot more.
Dr. Ray's like, I'm going to make sure we plug everything we can and say, hey, Cass is doing it all. But yeah, no, absolutely. That's great. I'm happy to hear that such a thing does exist for people that do need it, and that you can be a super great support for that. And I like what you said too about like, I wish this was there for me. Like, that sounds amazing. Having a support group that I could go to, especially if it's one in person. Oh yeah. I wish that was like a thing for me where I was at in, Waco, Texas a couple of years ago. But yeah, I'm so glad that RFR is doing more stuff like that. So very cool, Cass. So you've been a volunteer, sounds like, for a little bit now. You're doing a lot of different stuff behind the scenes. Is there any big upcoming projects or stuff that's happening for RFR right now? What's the future looking like?
Yeah, so the future, I mean, at least in social media, we are planning on doing all kinds of fun stuff. So we're definitely looking at planning on maybe doing some stuff on Twitch. We definitely want to move on to being more active on YouTube and on Instagram and on TikTok. We've got a lot of things cooking up in the background here, and it's going to be really exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. And of course, if anybody listening wants to volunteer and help us out, we would love some help.
Cool.
And Cass and his team also interact with our Australia team. And they have their own unique challenges around social media in Australia, but we try to coordinate all this stuff around the world. There's a lot to do.
Yeah, so you were actually telling me before the show that just recently RFR has been officially incorporated in Australia, which is awesome. Yeah. Super cool. So how big is it? Are we going to get? Is it global domination at this point? What's next? You're going to get to Madagascar, or where's the next center going to go?
I don't know. I think Cass agrees with me that we are on a road and path to take over the world. That's our goal.
Cool.
Now, if we get to Mars, then we'll be sending people to Mars to
get there before Elon does. Yeah. Let's do it.
Right.
Let's do it. Cass, thanks so much for sharing your experiences with being a volunteer with RFR. Was there anything else that you wanted to share before we let you go?
I think I'm okay. I could always talk about my story and how I left religion, but if we don't have time for that, that's okay too. I'm happy I got to share, and happy I got to come hang out and share what I do and share how awesome recovering from religion is.
Oh man, you should. I mean, if you want to talk about that real quick before we get to the next caller, if you think it'd be interesting for other folks to hear, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to keep it between 2 or 3 minutes. I'll try not to ramble on too much here. But for me, my journey, I was raised as a young Earth creationist. So I was taught that the Earth was 6,000 years old. It was completely covered in water. I mean, the whole shebang. The Bible was super literal in my upbringing. So from about 2 months old until I was 13 or 14. I was raised in one single church. And not only did I go to this church for church, I also went there for elementary and middle school. So for big chunks of my life, I was spending, 6-7 hours and 6-7 days a week at church. So I was super indoctrinated into this belief system. Sometime in middle school, I got diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. And that kind of started my journey away from religion, because I couldn't justify there being this all-powerful, all-loving dude in the sky while also having my genetic makeup have errors in it. It didn't really start making sense to me anymore. And so I started asking questions, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with religion, but they tend to not really like questions.
You don't say. You don't say. That'd be news to me, Cass, but yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of like my first steps away, and my family actually went the other direction when I got diagnosed. They clung even harder to their religion, and so that caused a lot of strife and a lot of complications within our family dynamics, because they were definitely not supportive of me kind of looking away. They always were trying to rope me back in. They would always bulldoze through my boundaries, when I didn't want to talk about religion. And, of course, when you have a religious family, every holiday you celebrate is steeped in religion, so it really made a lot of things complicated there.
Isn't that funny though? Because like they want to celebrate their holidays and they want you to go to church, then they want you to do all these things, right? But like when you want to talk about the religion, suddenly, they don't. Suddenly that conversation's closed off. Isn't that interesting? Because I feel like I've had a similar experience, and I feel like a lot of people have had that experience.
Yeah, exactly. They always tried bringing up like certain aspects of their religion, and I'd be like, remember when they did this like super awful thing? Or like I would just twist it and being like, well, this was like a very religious group of people attacking someone for a different ideology, and the entire conversation would stop. Like it would just end right there. It was like, okay, you guys don't really want to talk about this.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had a really great journey to go across from growing up in a young earth creationist household with a religious school and religious background to becoming a volunteer for recovering from religion. So good for you for making that journey and for making it easier for other people to go on that journey. Cass, props to you for that.
Well, thank you so much. Stuff like what the ACA does introduced me to recovering from religion and really helped me learn that I was in fact not alone on my journey and in my thoughts and belief systems. So, Dan and everybody behind the scenes with the ACA and everybody at the ACA, just want you guys to know that I very much personally appreciate what you guys do as well.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Cass. Good. That really does mean a lot.
Thanks for calling, Cass.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and let you go because I want to talk to some other folks. But Cass, thanks so much for calling in and sharing your experience with that because, you can do it. You can absolutely do it. If you want to be a volunteer for the Atheist Community of Austin or RFR, there's definitely ways you can support and help other folks make that journey just a bit easier. I'm going to cut the chatter between us, Dr. Ray, because I want to get – there's like at least 2 interesting calls that I want to talk to. And we're getting to the end of the show here. So I want to see if we can get to both. Maybe we'll see. But first, I'm going to talk to who I think is Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben calling us from Virginia. Dr. Ben, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
What's up? I just saw that Dr. Ray was on, and I was at the excursion just a few weeks ago. And so I wanted to tell everybody how great the excursion is and that everybody should try to go next year.
Heck yeah. We got 2 doctors on the show right now. This is the most educated Truth Wanted has ever been right now. That's crazy.
Tell them what the excursion is, Dr.
Yeah,
Ben.
What is the excursion? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's a weekend where you go all together as a community, and there's resources for people who are recovering from religion, of course, because it's an RFR event. So there are support groups, there's community building events, there's ways that you can kind of process your deconstruction and deconversion through like artistic methods, such as making music, there's karaoke nights, there's different panels, including one about, there's one that's really good about like sexual education and things that a lot of people didn't know about. But there's something for everybody at these events, and whether you are newly deconverted and need a community and need some support, or if you've been out for a while and just want to be around like-minded people, it's definitely a place for everybody. And if if there are ways that you need help getting there, there are ways for that as well. So everybody should go. And I mean, small thing as well, but Dr. Ray is really good at karaoke. So if you don't want to miss, you definitely don't want to miss out on that. So show up even just for Dr. Ray singing Country Roads. That's all you need in your life.
Okay, I was going to ask, what's the song? So Country Road, huh?
Dr. Ben, thank you, Dr. Ben. I'll when I get my music contract, I'll give you 10% of my new proceeds. Dr. Ben was one of our special guest speakers at the excursion, and first time I think Dr. Ben had been there. We really enjoyed it. It was fun.
Heck yeah! It sounds like a good time. I'm glad we could get that in there as well for folks. I should probably go out to that event one of these days. But Dr. Ben, I got another call that I want to get to before we wrap up today's show. Anything else you want to add before we let you go?
Nope, that was it. I just wanted everybody to know about the excursion and that they should look forward to it next year.
Third week of September next year.
Cool. Okay, that's definitely a thing. Put it on your calendar, folks. Dr. Ben, as always, thanks for talking to me.
Good show.
And good hearing from you. We were just recently on a stream together talking about medical myths on Dr. Ben's channel. So that's a fun thing if you're interested in that stuff. He's been picking that up again. So very cool, very fun stuff here. Let's get to this other call real quick while we're at the tail end of the show. We got K-Dub, who is calling in from Virginia, who wants to talk about the chat poll that we had on YouTube here. K-Dub, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Hey guys, good to talk to you. I came in kind of late, but I saw that poll, and I feel like at least all the friends around me, and I hang with a pretty liberal crowd these days. Every one of us that was brought up in religion feels some kind of trauma, and myself included. And a lot of the folks that I hang with are members of the LGBT community. And a lot of them have a very similar story to mine. I personally feel like my growth was stunted because of it. Southern Baptist, being told that being gay is the worst thing you can be. So I tried really hard to be straight for many years, and it was such a waste. And had that not been preached to me, and of course you feel like they're talking to you right there sitting in the pew, had that not been stuck in my head, I think I would have let myself be who I am a lot sooner in life. So yeah, I feel a bit traumatized by that, and angry. I've been angry for a long time, and I've been officially an atheist since 2012, but it's hard to let go of that anger.
Yeah, and just for context, for those who aren't watching this live and who are listening to this as the podcast for, right? Our chat poll today was, I think, something along the lines of, does a religious upbringing, I think, I can't remember the wording off the top of my head, it inherently cause trauma or does cause trauma? And you're saying in your experience, it did, in fact, cause you trauma, that it is sort of inherent to your trauma was your religious upbringing. I mean, am I understanding you right, K-Dub?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the people in my circle we're in a southern region, so
yeah.
Southern Baptist is one of the big ones. But you could name off several other denominations that are so similar. Pentecostal folks, and any flavor of Baptist, pretty much. And my parents were not super conservative; they were older. But I had some good experiences in the church. Who didn't?
Sure.
Well, not everybody, but I sang in the choir. A small town, we're friends, did some fun things. But those fun things could have come from any community organization, minus the Jesus part.
Yeah, and speaking to that real quickly, because I've talked about this in my experience, Kate, growing up in Texas, right? Like, there is definitely it's more common to go to a church and to be part of a church community, even for those who aren't inherently religious. That oftentimes folks will go to church around here because they are just the source of community centers, particularly in Waco, where my old friend David Oliverio has a joke who says there's more Christians than people in Waco, which is very funny because it's kind of true. But so I live in Austin now, and I have liberal friends, and I have folks who are much more secular, and I do get the question every once in a while of like, why do I talk about this stuff? Why are we even interested in these kinds of subjects, especially if I'm not even religious anymore? And I think it's because there is such a strong hold over people with this stuff. And like, I'm one of the exceptions. You are one of the exceptions, K-Dub, of like folks who are able to break out of this stranglehold that a religious upbringing sort of uniquely can give you in many ways, right? There are some people that never do. And that's terrifying, but also sad, right? Like, I am interested in showing people, hey, there's a different way you can live your life in a way that doesn't have to be as repressive, doesn't have to be as restricting, or doesn't have to limit, in my case too, limit what I thought it meant to be a good person, right? Because I also didn't have an understanding of what it meant to be fully good without being Christian. And that's obviously silly in hindsight, but was a very real reality for me. It is a reality for millions of people. So I hear you, KW. Yeah, specifically the wording of our poll was, is a religious upbringing always traumatic, right? And while I can't say it's always traumatic for everybody, it is certainly traumatic for those who have decided to leave, right? For many of us, because it is a reason why a lot of us do leave, because of the hardships that come from it. It is a stereotype about our community that we're all hurt by it, and that we're just talking about our hurt all the time. But hey, if we're all hurt by something, doesn't that mean there's a problem? Doesn't that mean that there's something that should be fixed? Isn't that always interesting when Christians are like, oh, you're just mad because the church hurt you? Yeah. Yeah, that's why, kind of. Don't you think that's an issue? Don't you think that's worth talking about? But anyway, I'm going on my own rant here. Dr. Darrel Ray, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the whole notion of trauma needs to be more nuanced, because not everybody that was in a religion was traumatized.
Sure.
However, there's nuances that are important, and that is, you may not have experienced trauma within the religion. Being a white male in a semi-conservative, independent Christian church, that's what I was raised in. I was actually in a position of privilege. My father was chairman of the board. So I got by with a lot of things. But it wasn't until I left the church that the consequences hit. It's like you're in this bubble and you're being protected. And if I was a woman in that same church, I would have been shamed for having sex outside of marriage. I had sex outside of marriage, but I wasn't shamed for it. But a woman in that church would have been, if I'd have gotten pregnant outside of, there's all those things that would have traumatized them within the church. When I left the church, the trauma begins with this social isolation, with the loss of community, with the potential depression that comes from not having any support system around him anymore. Yeah. So where the trauma occurs is also important. It can happen within the church, and it happen on the leaving of the church, or it can happen, of course, in both places, and often does in both places. And then again, there are people who weren't traumatized. Yeah. We're not here to diagnose, and I think don't self-diagnose. That's like we talked earlier. You got to go to a professional. They will diagnose you, or they'll help you diagnose. But just get better. What you're diagnosed with is not as important as what do you need to do to get better and live your best life. And that's my 2 cents.
There you go. K-Dub, any other thoughts you want to share with us? Thanks so much for sharing your story, by the way.
Absolutely. I think that the friends that I have now that don't think much about it, that are still churchgoers, are I call them Christian light folks. Episcopals. For instance, Episcopals and some Methodists. And they're the only churches that show up and as a vendor for the LGBT festivals. Go looking and see who it is that shows up. Not counting the Universalists, Unitarians. We love them, but they don't really count. Episcopals are the ones that are there. The only gay friendly denomination, it seems, at least where I am. But yeah, thanks for taking my call and listening. I appreciate it, y'all.
Thanks for calling.
Y'all absolutely. Have a good night.
Thank you, K-Dub. Thank you for sharing. It's so important. I mean, just like the act of self-expression is still a novelty to me in some ways. It's just not a thing in the churches that I was a part of and I grew up with. To be able to say, yeah, I have a sexual orientation or sexual identity that I had to struggle with, and like my community wasn't accepting of me. I just can't imagine. imagine, and I don't know how dehumanizing it could feel for the people around you to just like not be accepting of that now. Like I'm just in a completely different place than I was when I was in a religious community, and by and large, that religious community was not the reason why I'm here today talking to people about, their experiences like this and their, their own personal journeys. I wouldn't have been accepting if I had kept in the places where I was at. And I don't know, there's just something to that, I guess, that makes it worth examining. But anyway, I'm rambling here, Dr. Del Rey. I'm rambling because you know why? We're at the tail end of tonight's program. I want to give a great special thank you for joining me today, and to remind folks that we are going to try to get you for just a couple more minutes in the after show in just a bit. So if you're interested in that, go to tiny.cc/ACD Discord, where we're going to hang out in a few minutes here. But thank you so much for being on with me today, sir.
Yeah, fun.
Yeah, if people want to know where they can find you, where should they go?
Well, I'd go look up my books, The God Virus, and my other book, Sex and God, both of which were relevant to much of what we were talking about here today. You can find me at Recovering from Religion, of course, Darrel at Recovering from Religion. And I hope you'll consider volunteering for us or donating to us. Donate to the ACA too, by the way. We're not selfish here. And I will say, our our volunteers got together and gave me a surprise birthday present of a brick.
For the ACA. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I wanted to let you
that?
guys know our volunteers love you guys, and that was very generous and nice of them to do that.
Awesome. I knew there was a brick with your name on it. I didn't realize that was donated by other folks. So that's really cool.
Yep.
That's so cool.
And the miniature is sitting on my shelf in my living room. If you ever come to visit me, you'll see it.
That is super cool. Well, thanks again for joining me on tonight's show. I always love talking to you. I always love having you. We have such great conversations, and I'm sure we'll have some more in a bit here. So we will get to the outro. But before we go, the prompt for this week, remember, is what trivial conspiracy theory do you think has merit, or at least some merit? And leave your comment below the video, and we might read it on next week's episode. As always, liking, subscribing, commenting, doing all the YouTube stuff is helpful to us, and we always appreciate it to show your support in that way. And with that being said, that's about all I've got to tonight, folks. So I am one more thing too. We got to thank Kelly. Almost forgot Kelly. Let's get Kelly on the screen here. Kelly, there he is. Thanks for being backup host tonight, Kelly. Appreciate it. And look at that tie too. Oh, it's amazing.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
That's like a cool Truth Wanted tie too, because it's got the colors. I love it. It's really good. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Kelly used to volunteer for RFR.
That's right. Yep. It's very incestuous here. We're all just helping each other out, which is really great. Okay, time to wrap things up, folks. I'm Objectively Dan. This has been Truth Wanted. Remember to always keep on the truth, and I'll see you next time.
Watch the non-profits and join the hosts in the live chat. Visit tiny.cc/YTNP.